Now, before we get into today's episode, I did want to mention one thing. So I started cold calling different potential partners, potential clients, and nobody knew what UndocuStartup was. Nobody knew who I was. And that just tells me one thing, that the marketing needs to be up there, right? Like, I mean, 2,000 followers, I thought it was a lot. I thought the community would know who I am by now, but no. So that's something that I want to focus on moving forward.
Welcome to UndocuStartup by Juan Maya Hernandez.
Welcome to today's episode of UndocuStartup Weekly, where I share the biggest lesson that I've been learning building the #1 entrepreneurship program for undocumented students. If you're an Undocu student liaison and you want to bring my programs to your campus, please visit www.undocuStartup.com. Again, that is www.undocuStartup.com. All right, now on to today's episode. I want to do something a little bit different. I realized that I posted over 24 episodes around the company, around the brand, but I've never posted an episode around how UndocuStartup came to be, right? It's about to be our 3rd year for myself doing it full time, and it's about to be a little more than 3 years since the initial idea. So I want to sort of use this episode to tell you a little bit more about that. So let's jump right into it. It really started in 2016 when I was in high school. I didn't know I was undocumented. I didn't know what that meant. But the day that I found out was when I received a internship at this organization. I was part of this organization called United Way, and I was in their leadership program, and they provided an internship to all the students that were in the leadership program every summer. And I remember that I received an offer, and they were asking me for my social security. I didn't have it. And then I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do about it? Luckily, I was able to get a stipend, get a scholarship. That was the way that I was going to get paid. But that's when the initial problem that I wasn't able to get hired with because of my status came to be. Now, I also want to say, like, contextually, I also grew up near the MacArthur Park area, downtown LA. There's a lot of street vendors. There's paleteros, there's tamaleras, there's street vendors everywhere. So I would always walk, around. Some of my family members are also entrepreneurs, so I've just been exposed to entrepreneurship ever since I was little. But really, that's when the first initial idea I had. And I remember I posted a YouTube video, and you could probably look this up, and I'll probably put it here. But I also said that I was going to be a business owner. I said that in high school when I was applying to the scholarship. So the idea was always planted in there. Now, and then when I go to UCLA, I wasn't thinking about like my limitations of my status or anything, because at that time they had done they released the Dream Act, that there was some funding for me to go to college, and I would go to all these different workshops on how I can fund college. So I ended up applying to UCLA. I got into my dream school. UCLA was my dream school. And before I did that, I took on a few jobs. So the first job that I realistically had, but I mean, I don't really consider it a job, but it was my job offer. One of my friends, his mom owned a Mediterranean restaurant in downtown LA. And I just asked them like if they can give me a job as a busboy. So they gave me a job. I went there one day. They made me sweep. They didn't train me. I just didn't like the way I was getting treated. And long story short, I never went back. Right? I never went back. And that was the first job I had. And then after that, I also worked as a day laborer with my dad, picking up trash for rich people in Woodland Hills, for homeowners essentially. And I learned a lot. I did that during the summer of me going to UCLA, right? Because I needed some money, and I was going to live on campus, and I was going to need money essentially. So those were pretty much the only 2 jobs that I had. All right. And then from there, really the turning point in terms of doing something on my own, and in terms of getting into entrepreneurship, the turning point came in my 2nd year, because I fell under academic probation at UCLA. I failed one of my classes, and I needed to retake it. I needed to make $1,000 to be able to continue with the trajectory that I had to be able to graduate in 4 years. And I didn't know how I was going to come up with $1,000, but so what did I do? I went to the UndocuStartup. I went to the Startup UCLA office, and I told them that I knew how to take photos. I told them about my skills. I told them I want to start a business. What resources do they have? And the interesting part about this story is that literally a month later, that same lady that had spoken to me, she ended up telling me, how much is it going to cost for you to photograph an event on campus? So normally I was like, well, I need $1,000, but I'll be okay if I get $600. So I told her, hey, I faked it till I make it. Like, there's really no sugarcoating anything. I faked it till I make it. I said, I normally do this for 800, but for you, because I know you, I'm gonna do it for 600. And that's what I sent her 600 in the email. She ended up paying me through a scholarship. And it was sort of like a big realization, like, okay, you're told one thing, and then here is an experience that goes against all the beliefs, right? It goes against all the beliefs. And yeah, I made $600. I got hired again because I did such a great job. And obviously, I had the skill of photography. I had been developing that since high school. But that was the first time somebody ever paid me. And it wasn't somebody within the community. It was somebody that people would tell you, like, oh, don't tell nobody. And that's when it initially started. And put into context, I didn't have DACA at this time. Like, I didn't have DACA. I do have DACA now, but I didn't have DACA as a student at UCLA for the first 4 years. So after that experience, I wouldn't go to a lot of events, but I did go to a few entrepreneurship events that UCLA was doing, like the center. And I would just get inspired. I would get in a room, get inspired by these entrepreneurs. And the beauty about being able to photograph an entrepreneurship event was that I was surrounded by entrepreneurs. I remember they go up to the front of the room, they start pitching their companies, and I was like, they're gonna pitch coffee shops, they're gonna pitch, mom and pop shops that they want to build. And remember, all these people do not look like me. They don't look Hispanic, they don't look Latino, they're probably not undocumented, right? But when they went up there, I was shocked. They started talking about, how do I build the next Facebook, the next Giphy, the next Twitter, the next Snapchat. They were thinking that big, and I was like, why doesn't my community think that way? I was like, why does my community not think that way? So that's when it did a switch on me. Like, it was like a turned on switch in my head. And after that, like, I did a headshot photography business. So I started doing headshots for students. I grew it to 64 total customers. I made over $10,000. I wasn't keeping track, but all I knew is that most of that money would go towards the remaining money that I would need for my tuition and to go out and stuff. And that was sort of like the proof that I needed, that would go against all the beliefs. I didn't know anything about LLCs. I didn't know anything about I-10s. The only thing I knew how to do was to make money. That's the only thing. Like, I went from charging $15 for the student at Cal State Northridge. Then I went to 45, 55, 65. Then I raised it to 85, 75. And then eventually I started doing graduation photos, groups of four. I started charging $700 for a group of four in 1 hour. And I was like, okay, this is great. And I was doing it part-time. I wasn't like overthinking it. I needed money. I needed to do something. And that's kind of like what would give me that confidence to be able to be like, okay, I can actually do something on my own. And and I remember at that time also, and I have to mention this, is at 19 years old, I read this book. I wanted to, again, you're around these entrepreneurs, you're around people that think bigger, right? And around these entrepreneurs, I was like, I want to be a millionaire. I need to be a millionaire. I need to figure out. So I go on Google and I find this book. It was called The Millionaire Fast Lane. And that book changed my life. It was like, the fast lane in entrepreneurship is not that it's going to be quick. The fast lane is that it's going to take around 6 to 7 years of dedicated hard work. And then you can build the system that then you can monetize, or then you can sell companies. You hear companies sell, you hear companies get acquired, all that stuff. It takes approximately 7 years. And I needed to find something like that I can potentially, scale. And I'll also say that UCLA was not easy for me. Like, I went under academic probation in my second year, and then in my fourth year, I was under subject to dismissal. So if I had a less than a 2.0 GPA in my second year, in my fourth year, I had a less than a 1.0 GPA. I had a 0.8 GPA. I failed two of my upper division mathematics courses where you had to prove things. It was just very difficult at that time. I also had depression at that time. I also had COVID. And I felt like maybe I was not going to graduate UCLA, So Even though, yes, during that time I was doing hedge photography, I was making money. On the other side, I also wanted to graduate from UCLA because marketing, branding, the name, number one public university in the nation, right? Like all that stuff I was thinking about. I was like, no, I need to graduate. I need to graduate. So I focused on my studies, but I needed to do it on my terms. So I ended up petitioning for an extra year. I said, let me become a part-time student. Let me only take two classes. I didn't have a lot of courses left. I could only handle like about two STEM classes a quarter. And that's what I did for my last year, right? And as I was going into my last year, um, I started thinking about what am I gonna do after I graduate? What am I gonna do after I graduate? I have no DACA. It was during this time they were barely opening up applications. And I went to a career fair. And people tell you, like, if you're undocumented, don't go to career fair. You're not gonna get hired. People are not gonna give you opportunities. But I did land a internship opportunity for growth marketing at this startup company called I don't want to say their name because I don't know if they watch my content, but I landed this opportunity again, going against everything that everybody was telling me. But essentially, they were not able to hire me because of my status. I wasn't able to land it because of my status, and it was there where the birth of UndocuStartup came to be. I said, okay, they're not able to hire me. Is there another student that deals with the same problem? Is there somebody else that has the same experience as me, has no DACA, and they're struggling to find a job after they graduate? So that's when the idea of UndocuStartup came to be. And what I did is I surveyed most of my friends. Like I surveyed like 20, 40, 50 friends. I told them, hey, can you just fill out this survey? I was just doing customer discovery. I was applying everything that I learned at Startup UCLA's workshops, and I applied it to this. And I was like, let me just see if there's a market for this. I received a lot of people. They were telling me like, yeah, like I interviewed people that were DACA, I interviewed people that don't have DACA. And I learned that it all comes back to what do I do after I graduate? What jobs? What are undocumented companies? All this stuff. And that's really where the idea came. So once you have the idea, then it came to be like, okay, what are you going to do about it? And that's really where it started, right? So in 2021, I got denied my dream job because I didn't have DACA. So then in 2022, I had this idea to help undocumented students get jobs. And one of my goals was always to go through the Startup UCLA Summer Accelerator, this entrepreneurship program. You get $5,000 for your venture. You get the whole office. You get to work on it during the summer. And I was like, I need to do that before I graduate. So I applied. I got in 2022 with this platform. So, but before that, it was not called UndocuStartup. It was called Prepare. All right, it was called Prepare, and so I launched a recruitment agency. I said, why don't I launch a recruitment agency? I had no experience in recruitment. I had no experience, but I did buy like books on recruitment. Like, recruitment agencies, the way that they get funded is if they can place somebody in a job, they can get a percentage of their salary. So imagine you're placing somebody for $150,000, you get 10% of that. You get $15,000 as somebody just connecting, right? So you were in charge of finding talent, and I was like, you were in as a recruitment agency, you're in charge of finding talent, and you're also in charge of connecting them with companies. So that was the first idea, and the only thing I knew how to do at that time was I knew two of my friends that had DACA, and then I knew like two companies that I had connected with their founders, and I just connected them, and I helped two of my DACA friends get jobs. Now that idea did not succeed, and it didn't succeed because I just didn't stick with it long enough. I think if I stuck with it long enough, it would have succeeded. And the other thing I would say why it did not succeed is because of the law. Like, you can't really market as something based on people's immigration status, because then you're discriminating against people that are from here and all that stuff. So I just didn't want to get into that whole legal stuff. I was like, no, that's gonna be such a hard problem. So then I had to pivot. So when I got into the summer accelerator at UCLA, I pivoted to building a freelance platform for undocumented students. So my way, again, is like you're connecting talent, right? I understand that there's a group of undocumented students that want jobs, and I understand there's a group of companies that want to hire them, that want to give them opportunities. So I was going to be in charge of connecting them. So again, very basic. I built a very basic website. I don't know how to code, but I found no code tools. I built a website that was connected to Airtable. I built a community of 60 students. It was just through Google Form. And then I built a community of organizations, companies that needed interns, that needed people, needed freelancers. And I was able to help 6 students make $2,000. And it was a win. Now, why did I stop doing that one? I stopped doing that one because I reached out to different lawyers that were alumni from UCLA, and I just asked them, can I just get a 10-15 minute meeting with you? I spoke to them. I asked them about certain immigration laws, employment laws, and stuff. And essentially, again, you hit a roadblock on the legal side, but that thing is still in my mind. I'm like, I know I can build it. I know what it takes. I know there's talent, and I know there's this. I know I can connect, but that's something more in the future. So that was something that I launched in 2023. And then after that, I pivoted during the program again. Most of these things that I was launching only lasted like 2-3 months, and that was a big mistake. I never really focused on it long enough to see if it was gonna work out. If these seeds that I was planting were gonna turn into a tree. So after that, I launched a questions and answers platform for immigrant experiences. So the idea was, why don't you build something like Reddit? Again, very ambitious. Build something like Reddit, get anonymous questions from immigrants, and then connect them with experts that can share knowledge about, what an immigrant means essentially. And yeah, that one I had 800 users. It was all right, but there was really no clear path on how I was going to monetize it as a founder. There was no clear path on how I was gonna do that. But that was 2023, grew it to 800 users, and then it kind of died down because again, like when you build a marketplace, right, which was the freelance platform, that's a marketplace. There's one person on one side, there's another person on the other side. You have to recruit for both. The same with this. You have to find people that are going to ask questions. You got to find the experts. It was just going to be a whole mess. I just never had a clear path. But the thing that I did learn from launching a questions and answers platform like Reddit, like Quora, was that everybody cared about money, right? I understood that people cared about money. I understood people cared about building wealth. People had a lot of questions around that. And also, how do you start your own business, right? So then again, 2 months later, I do my first marketing job with DACA. Like I had DACA at this time. I started doing marketing, and it was great. I learned a lot, but I still wasn't giving up on this UndocuStartup dream. And so with the information, I said, why don't I just create a simple, minimum viable product, low cost product, something that I can do on my own. And that's where I came up with the Immigrant Biz Hub, or the preparebiz.com, where I launched a course. It was called Immigrant Entrepreneurship 101 course. We had 100 users. We made $10,000 in 2-3 months. And that was the one where I actually saw some profit. I saw I was getting closer to it. Okay, I was getting closer to it, but again, I was not ready to either scale this. I was not committed. I was doing this part-time, so I let this idea go. I don't think what I was charging for was up to par to the amount of value that I wanted to provide and the amount of money that I wanted to charge for this. And I essentially also let that one go because there, like, the thing about this course that I found is that the way that I got to $10,000 is I went from charging individual people to buy the course to charging groups of people to buy a course. So instead of charging, let's say 190, I don't remember the price. I think it was $99. I started doing bundles of like a group of 10, and that's where the money was at. And essentially they're paying for access. But again, I wasn't sure if the course was something that was viable and people were really gonna enjoy that, right? And it was also difficult to track the progress because, like, yes, on one side you want to build passive income. Yes, you want to make as much money as possible. But at the same time, I'm ethical. Like, I'm not going to charge somebody if I don't think it's good enough. So I let it go and I said, okay, let's go on to the next. But I know that this is a topic that people care about, the entrepreneurship course. And I do remember one of the directors at Startup UCLA in the accelerator program told me, why don't you just build tools for immigrant founders? Why didn't you just do that? And he was right. So then Once I made that money with the course, I quit my job. I said, okay, I have enough validation. I'm gonna make the jump back again. I lasted at my job 5 months. And honestly, like I'm gonna be really honest, like at the beginning when I had my job in marketing, I enjoy marketing, but eventually you hit a plateau where you stop learning, and that happened to me. I started thinking about like, all right, I'm supporting somebody else's vision, but when is it going to be my turn? When is it going to be my mission, right? So that's why I quit my job 5 months into marketing. I was doing SMS. I was working at this online grocery delivery app, doing SMS marketing, doing social media marketing. And once I quit that, it was kind of like, okay, I have some money saved up. Let's just go all in. And so then the next step was like, can you turn this course into something more hands on? At this time, I had already done like 3, 4 programs. I've been a part of different entrepreneurship programs. And I was like, why don't I just build something on my own? And why don't I just facilitate it? If not now, then when? So I launched that in 2024. I built a new website. It was still called, my business was still called Prepare at this point. So I built this website. I launched it. I started reaching out to different people that could potentially invest in it. And then one client said yes to me. Out of all the emails, I started sending emails. One client says yes to me. I send a proposal. I get paid, and I'm like, whoa, like this is a lot of money. And my very first thing was my incubator didn't sell, but the idea of it did sell. But what the client wanted me to do, what the partner wanted me to do was, why don't I just do the incubator in 5 hours? And that's how the bootcamp came to be, right? It wasn't something in line, but I was getting closer and closer and closer to building something that people want. And as soon as somebody told me yes, I was like, okay, this is great, you know? So I had an incubator and I also had a boot camp. The boot camp came because of my first client. I got paid. And then I started pitching. I would pitch the incubator, I would pitch the boot camp, and people just gravitated towards the boot camp, the boot camp, the boot camp. And that was the year when that was the year where I did my first program in front of 70 students. Very nerve wracking. I practiced 70 hours for that first boot camp, and everything worked out, right? Everything worked out. And that's when I realized like I could actually do this. So imagine this, right? At UCLA, like I didn't like presenting in front of a class, but now you had to do it, and now there's money on the line, right? So like now you're kind of like, well, I mean, it's good. So yeah, but that year we ended up helping 147 students launch 30 business ideas, and they created 14 jobs, and I learned a lot during that experience, right? But what I learned from 2023 to 2024 is like if you go hands on, you're gonna be able to get a lot more data as opposed to just having a course, because everybody's gonna finish the course at a different time. I can do all these stuff, and I could send surveys, but it's going to be difficult. So from 2024, then in 2025, I really just doubled down on the boot camp. But I was still doing an incubator here and there. I was still, if people brought it up, I was still going to do that. But in 2025, my goal was just to focus on the boot camp. Let's just do the boot camp. And that's when that's how we got the numbers that we did. Like last year, we helped over, in total, since 2024, we've helped 350 undocumented students. And now I had a dollar sale challenge where students go on campus, they ask strangers for money, and 40 students created a job, and that's really something that brings a lot of joy to me, because it's sort of like, okay, I had this idea 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and now you start seeing the fruits of your labor. And now you're starting to see success stories of all these other students, right? So, like, out of all those students, we had a good amount of success stories. Like, I had a student that started selling at farmers market. I had a student that charges $200 an hour. And those are all success stories that, like, bring a lot of joy to me. And last year, we also did our UndocuStartup bootcamp tour, where the mission was, let's make this more accessible to students that are not in California. And let's see, where are they at? Are all the students that are undocumented here in California face the same challenge, right? In other states? And yeah, we did that. The goal for Undocu Startup Tour was, let's just run it. Let's see how many students are going to join free programs, how many of them are actually committed. And that's how we did the Undocu Startup Bootcamp Tour, right? At 6 different states, we had to cancel about 3 of the programs, but then I launched the national cohort. So that was 2025. And now in 2026, we're really looking at just wanting to expand the bootcamp, wanting to make this more accessible, trying to figure out how we can monetize the UndocuStartup tour. If we do end up doing it again this year, how can we figure out a way where we can have partners, maybe we can have sponsors? And because last year I did lose a lot of money when it came to the bootcamp tour, and now this year I'm just like, how do I just make sure that I'm not on the negative and hopefully be on the positive, right? So with all that, last year I also switched the name from Prepare to UndocuStartup, because Prepare came from this ideology of like my parents or relatives that own businesses. I always wondered, right? Like they come here, they make the jump, and it takes a lot of guts and a lot of resilience to be able to leave your home country, and you start a company here and you're able to just somehow make it, right? But our community never makes that next step of like, okay, they're low income here, or maybe even middle class if you're being ambitious. But how, what would be different if they had somebody to guide them, like, okay, these are all the laws, this is how you can legalize your business, this is where you can get funding. And I just like to believe that if there was preparation, and this is where Prepare came to be with the name at least, it was like if they could prepare, how big could their companies be, right? Like if there was an investment fund, if there was a community and all that stuff, right? And that's why the name was Prepare. I was like, if I can help them prepare, imagine the scale of their businesses, right? If there was somebody that believed in it, somebody that understood the system, right? And that was why it was called Prepare. And then I made the decision to change it to Undocu Startup because I did meet a DACA millionaire. And that DACA millionaire, I was on the phone with him for 10, 15 minutes. One time he actually called me because I gave him my number. And I told him my vision, and he was like, why don't you change the name to something that speaks to the community you're trying to impact? That like wakes me up every morning, because I'm just like, just imagine, let's just say, choose a small number. Let's say 100 of our entrepreneurs build big companies, multi-million dollar companies. Don't you think there would be more independent contracting roles? Don't you think there would be more internships? Don't you think it would help the US economy? Right? Don't you think that's going to happen? Right? And that's really the big vision that we're building here. Right? So again, like it went from idea of like, okay, this is my problem. Let me start testing things out. I went through trial and error, but now that I'm here, now that I'm getting some traction, now that I'm applying for more funding, now that I'm looking at ways on how we can scale this, I know we're on the right path. And the only reason why I know we're on the right path is because one, more people are finding out about us. Two, we have more people sending us DMs around questions. And three, the success stories of the students. As long as we can help them build their confidence first, everything else will follow. And with partnerships and with belief and with hard work, I believe we can get there. So I just wanted to use this episode to tell you a little bit more about the history of Undocu Startup, where we were, where we are now, and where we are going. So again, like I've said this so many times, the vision is there's a venture fund. The vision is you can get investment. The vision is there's all these tools that can help you launch a business. The vision is we can create jobs together and we can help the US economy. And then hopefully, we can shift the US narrative around undocumented immigrants. So, with that being said, everyone, I appreciate you all for sticking with this episode. I know it was a long one. We spent around 20, 30 minutes just talking about the whole history. But I think it's important for you to understand the context. And I think it's important for you to understand that I didn't have DACA for 20 something years, right? And I just have DACA. So I've seen life. I've seen I've been an undergrad at UCLA without DACA for the first 4 years. I started a business, and then I've been on the side of DACA, and I understand one thing, that we're all just trying to make it. We're all just trying to survive. And at the end of the day, that is not enough. We need to be able to thrive. We need to have no limits. We need to have this no limit mindset, because only like that we will be able to make something great. So thank you all so much. If you enjoyed this episode, give it a thumbs up. Recommend this episode to somebody that needs to hear it. And remember, Undocu Entrepreneurship has no limits. And remember, be motivated and stay motivated, baby. I'll talk to you soon. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.